Hi guys, this is Juno from Juno's Combat Club, and today I'm breaking down the fight for EFC 89, the main event between Zulu versus Biko for the EFC flyweight title. Please hit the like button below the screen, as well as subscribe to this channel for more content. So on Saturday 11 September, Nkazimulo, Zulu Boy, Zulu and Luthando, Shorty, Biko will battle it out at EFC 89 for the flyweight title. Both fighters are highly skilled MMA fighters in their own right, both having had enjoyed international success as well as a claim to gold. Zulu, of course, is the quintessential striker with a background in Kyokushin karate, Muay Thai and K1 fighting. He's also a former multiple EFC title holder and was featured on season 24 of the UFC production, The Ultimate Fighter. Biko, on the other hand, is a judoka, a black belt, multiple SA champ, Commonwealth judo champion, and International MMA Federation African champion in 2016. And at one stage, he was the interim bantamweight champion. And his only two losses in the EFC has been against JP Base, who is now obviously in the UFC, and then against Bukang, who is in one championship. So nothing to be ashamed about. A very good record for both fighters. Very good high-level martial artists at the pinnacle of South African MMA. So I can see why people are excited for this fight. It's certainly going to be a spectacle. Okay, so let's look at the tail of the tape. On paper, I know it appears that this is a straightforward case of a striker versus a grappler, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Because what makes this interesting is that the striker has more submission wins than the grappler. In fact, the grappler has 0 submission wins. Zulu has 3 submission wins, but admittedly, Zulu has some concerns about his ground game, and he's been focusing on that for some time. And although we've seen him utilize the clinch, going for the takedowns, I mean, to be quite honest, I'm not too impressed by that, because I mean, when he does get his opponent down, he doesn't do much in terms of transitioning or getting into a dominant position. Have a look at the fight against Faiz Jacobs. He was able to get him down, but didn't do much damage. And I think that was the defining, factor when it came to the judge's decision. Although he got him down, he didn't do much. There was no real damage. So although he's been focusing on his ground game, the question will be how his ground game will feature against an obviously more proficient grappler like Biko. So the next important aspect to look at on the tail of the tape would be the considerable height and reach advantage that Zulu Boy has over Biko. And while that is so, and the height advantage is 22 centimeters with an 8 centimeter reach advantage, and your striker also happens to be a southpaw, so all indications are that Zulu will have the advantage. But my question is, does it even matter? And the reason why I say that is because Biko is a considerably smaller fighter than most, and most of his fights are against much taller fighters. We've seen many fighters go against Biko, and he's able to impose his will on them. He closes the distance very quickly, even though they're at range. He is very explosive, and that doesn't seem to be an impediment. So the point that I'm making is, does it even matter in this case? He's so used to it, he's accustomed to that. So it'll be like any other fight. He faces taller fighters with reach advantages all the time, except for BK, obviously. The next thing that I'd like to look at on the tail of the tape is the record. Zulu is obviously the more experienced fighter with 11 wins, with 4 losses, compared to Biko's 8 wins and 2 losses. Now, clearly, as the more experienced fighter, I would expect that you would have the better fight IQ. Although his last 3 fights wasn't his finest moments. The 2 losses that he had against Hadley and Faiz Jacobs obviously left a blemish on his confidence, and the last fight that he had against Fafa wasn't great. I mean, in all honesty, although he won the fight, I think there were times that he looked a bit shaken, he wasn't very composed, and I think, to my mind, the submission came as a result of the mistake of Fafa, not necessarily the dominance of Zulu. It was a disappointing fight for someone at that high caliber. I think I was a bit disappointed by that fight. And Biko, on the other hand, is on a 3-fight win streak. His only 2 losses were against 2 guys who are competing at the highest level in JP Base and BK. And he's coming off a win against a former undefeated Brazilian, Gian Sousa. And in fact, he got a performance of the night bonus for that performance. So the other aspect is that Zulu is a southpaw as opposed to Biko, who's an orthodox fighter. Now, conventional wisdom dictates that the southpaw would have the advantage. But to me, although the stances are important, because Biko will have to cover considerable distance to get to Zulu, and Zulu is known for staying out of range and always bouncing in awkward directions, and obviously utilizing his kicks to keep his opponents at bay. So the 2 real questions for me is, how will BK cover the distance given Zulu's kicking range, and how will Zulu's ground game hold up against Biko if he is taken down? Footage from Biko, just showing you some of the heavy ground and pound that he has. That was the fight against Eleanor. Yeah, he's very, very explosive. I mean, you'll see how he covers distance so quickly. And very tenacious, and he kept going, throwing. So even though his striking is not as high level as Zulu, he can knock someone down. He can really hurt someone. So yeah, as long as he sticks to his game plan, it might be possible for him to get the takedown. And once we get the takedown, then we'll see how good Zulu's grappling has become. Okay, so now we're looking at some of the footage of Zulu. High level striking. I mean, really, his shots are powerful, world class. I mean, just look at the way he slips, his head movement. Very, very aggressive. I mean, he stopped Sylvester. Yeah, he's got a tendency to drop his hands as he's going in for the kick and for the punch. But this uppercut, just look at the uppercut and the knees. I mean, there we go, that uppercut. It's just magnificent. I wish he would use that uppercut a lot more, as well as the knee. So let's now look at some of the ways that Zulu can potentially win the fight. 2 points to consider is that in the last few fights, Zulu has a tendency to back up a lot, right up until the cage, and I think that will expose him. So it would be in his interest to stay in the center of the hexagon. Also, if you have a look at his fight against Faiz Jacobs, it was quite obvious that towards the end in the championship rounds he was gassed. Trying to work in the clinch, going for the takedowns, I don't think he's accustomed to that type of work rate. So for that reason, it was apparent that in the championship rounds, he was just totally gassed. I mean, if you have a look at the fight, you'll see he throws his hands up in the air and tries to gesture Faiz to come forward. But I mean, that was obviously a coy, that he was gassed and didn't have the output like he used to. Although he's bouncing around, it's clear from just the way that he was fighting, he didn't have the output. So, and it makes sense because he doesn't always go the distance in his fights. Most of his fights finish by stoppage. In the first few rounds, he doesn't always go the distance. So he has an issue with his cardio. For that reason, I think three main things that he needs to consider. Firstly, as I mentioned, staying in the middle of the hexagon. It's imperative that it doesn't get backed up against the cage. I think Biko will exploit that by clinching a lot, because he's got strong arms and he's, I think, probably more strong than Zulu, and he will be able to gas him out and tie his arms out and weigh him down. So firstly, stay in the center. Secondly, keeping the range. I mean, Zulu does it any event, and he does it better than most people. I mean, he's always bouncing around. I mean, his footwork is impeccable. So I think he would be, it would be great if he could just stick to that game plan. Keep on the outside. Make Biko desperate for a takedown, make him sort of come towards him for the counter. As long as he keeps the range with his kicking, he should be fine. And then thirdly, just to with regards to his striking, he tends to be more predictable and throw hook, kick, roundhouse kick. I would like to see more straight front kicks and uppercuts. He's got an incredible uppercut. I'm not sure why he doesn't throw more of that. I mean, you see the fight against Nino, he dropped him. In the fight against Sylvester, he had some good success with that. There was a third fight that I can't get to at the moment, but it's something that he doesn't utilize often enough, and I think he would have a lot of success if he just stuck to his uppercuts at the appropriate time, and then obviously the leg kicks. So jabs, combination between jabs, uppercuts, and leg kicks, and going for the straight front kick. I think doing that will secure him at least the first few rounds, so that he'll have enough cardio going into the rest of the championship rounds if it's necessary. Of course, if he can stop Biko, it's more likely that he'll do it in the first few rounds. Biko, on the other hand, I think is accustomed to the grind. I mean, he's your typical judoka, grappler style. They love to go to the ground, the clinch. So I think he will have a lot of success if he is able to get the clinch and back up Zulu against the cage, weigh him down. The comments that I just made about Zulu gassing out, I think he would do well by going for body shots, leg kicks, and then ultimately, just wearing his arms down by just clinching a lot. Because I don't think you'll be able to get the takedown initially. I think you'll need to probably weigh him down, exhaust him a little before you'll be able to trip him. Getting the clinch and doing the typical judo trip or throws, and you'll be able to get him down and potentially ground and pound him. The body punches and leg kicks will obviously, in the earlier rounds, will bear fruit. In the later rounds, it will certainly slow him down, I think. And then the other thing that Biko does quite well is the chain wrestling. I mean, just transitioning from one move to another. I mean, it's probably from the years of competing, but he does it well, and I think it would be useful for him to utilize it a lot more in the earlier rounds. And then another thing is to just keep on driving and pushing it forward. Because Zulu has the reach advantage, you'll obviously keep the distance. And when you've got longer legs, you need that distance between yourself and your opponent in order to throw those whiplash kicks, etc. But by him forcing the takedown, forcing and driving forward, and pushing him up against the fence and just always constantly harassing him and being tenacious, you know, I think that'll really frustrate Zulu. It might make him desperate, and in that case he might make a mistake